Okay, welcome back to our Time to Thrive podcast. I'm Dr. Krista, your guide to this health journey. So, this podcast, we talk a lot about holistic health and different tips and tricks we can use to keep ourselves healthy. So, today we're joined by one of our doctors from Live Wellness, which is super exciting, Dr. Moses. He's one of our naturopathic doctors, and we're going to talk about his story today and his view on naturopathic medicine so all of you can get to know him. So welcome, Dr. Moses. We're glad to have you. Why don't we just start out with your story? Kind of tell us what brought you to naturopathic medicine. What was the background on that? How did you arrive at that decision?
Wow, that's a long journey. So this is I would say that this is probably my third career change in a sense. So I initially joined the US Navy when I was 19, and I was in the Navy for about 6 years and saw a lot of things, experienced a lot of things, went and saw a lot of countries, and as is the case with a lot of veterans, you're exposed to certain things, certain toxins, and I happen to work with radar, so I happen to be exposed to a lot of radiation or non-ionizing radiation, that is. And so um, I got out of the Navy and I did some construction while I did part-time. I University, that is, and I eventually finished I was encouraged to finish my bachelor in electronics when the when the economy went south in like 2008-ish. And so after doing that, I had a lot of digestive issues. I had a lot of other health issues that I was trying to get care for through the VA
Yeah.
and through just my regular doctor out in town, and nobody could quite figure out what was going on with me. And so I was just kind of like frustrated, but I was, determined. I just kept brushing it off like, I'm okay, I'm okay. But symptomatically, I kept getting worse. And eventually I ended up living in New Mexico when I got a job working for the FAA. And while I was in New Mexico, I lived near the reservation, and Native Americans use a lot of natural medicine. They have medicine men or medicine women. A lot of they focus a lot on natural health, and they have even a type of sauna. It's really fascinating. A lot of what other groups focus on for health, to bring health to themselves and to the community. And so I had already been exposed to natural medicine just throughout my life, through my mom and various other circumstances, but I just had a desire to learn more about my health because I was suffering, secretly. Um, I couldn't sleep. I was having a lot of GI issues. I was having a lot of skin issues, insomnia, as I mentioned, and it got so bad that I ended up basically getting in an accident twice while I was on the job. I, and part of my job involved climbing towers, communications towers, some of which were like 200 or 300 feet tall. And imagine me, because what started happening is I started falling asleep just randomly throughout the day, kind of like narcolepsy, but not narcolepsy. It was just, I was so exhausted that I would just literally fall asleep like at the wheel or at work as I'm typing up, something, like whatever it was that had to do with my everyday work. And so it was just getting really out of hand. And so I think the last accident, it caused so much damage. And I was grateful I didn't get fired, but it was a wake-up call for me that I needed to change. Something was not right. And so I visited a friend who lived in Scottsdale, Arizona, and he invited me to the seminar in Scottsdale. And there was this doctor there, naturopath. In my head, I didn't mention, but in my head, I thought naturopaths were just like, I don't know, uh, quacks or something like that, like something that doesn't really mean anything. It's just, oh, they know a little bit about herbs. That's it.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go. Okay, because he really insisted that I go. And so I went and I listened, and the more I listened, the room was packed. The more I listened, the more intrigued I was. I was like, wow, this is something else. And so, anyways, I listened to the seminar, and he was talking about gut health. And so I found out that this doctor had previously been an engineer like me, and he had also worked for the government or as a contractor. And so we had that connection instantaneously, and we talked till like midnight that night. I wouldn't recommend that you stay up, but that late at night. But in that occasion, we stayed up really late talking, and he told me about, what naturopathic doctors do and where you go to school to become one, and he told me about NUNM in Portland, and so I went and started doing a deep dive, and I spent probably like 6 months finding all about naturopathic medicine, just what the difference is, because apparently there are differences in training. And so I was interested in a very deep, founded in science, and something that was not just a superficial, like, oh, I don't know how to say this, but whenever I had met a naturopath in the past, it was always like, oh, you have this? Oh, do this. Even though it was like, no, I would not, never try that. That's probably going to kill me. Well, anyways, so it was a long journey. I eventually went and visited NUNM, and I fell in love with the medicine and the school and the environment, the and here I am today. It took me a while, but here I am today. It's kind of, yeah, I cut a lot of my story out, but yeah, I think that's the to keep it short.
Yeah, it sounds like there was a lot of kind of meant to be situations that happened within your story, meeting someone who was very similar to you, that was probably huge. Did you ever resolve your symptoms
Yeah.
prior going to school?
So it's interesting that you asked that, because I started implementing some things prior to me going to school. Actually, because I had to do pre-med requirements or prerequisites to go to NUNM or to any of the naturopathic schools. And so I had to go back, and it was about a 3-year process. So I came up with a plan of getting myself from where I was to moving to Portland. And I tried to make it as, a financial plan, just an educational plan, just what do I need to do to put my ducks in a row? And so while I was doing it, I started experimenting with eliminating certain foods in my diet.
Hmm.
And I started with gluten, or all gluten containing products. And actually initially I became a vegetarian, and then I went vegan. But that didn't really seem to help me as much. I feel like maybe in my case I lost a lot of weight, and
Hmm.
I just I felt like I was wasting. It wasn't until I eliminated gluten that I really started noticing, in my case, that I started to heal. And so a lot of my symptoms started to disappear. That the eczema, I mean, it was severe eczema, and luckily it was in places that are typically hidden by clothing, but it's still, there's a lot of, what if I hate to wear shorts because I don't want people to see the eczema on the backs of my legs, or um whatever. So I came up with this plan. I started eliminating foods, and I started to get better. But then I started reintroducing eggs and dairy, like after several years, and I started feeling better. I put on a little more weight, and then eventually I came to NUNM after I started in NUNM in 2017. uh, I feel like my health improving stalled, any improvements that I had, because the school, it's so intense. The curriculum is so intense, and there's so much stress involved with, with trying to stay afloat and doing the structure and function with Dr. Bronze, if you remember, and Dr. Dangerfield.
Yeah.
Um, and just trying to like handle it all the while having a family and uh there's just a bunch of other things going on in my life at the time. And they say that a lot of people who go to medical school end up getting divorced, and then I was one of those unfortunate examples. But it was one of those things, because one thing that helped me being at NUNM, that I started to learn so many things on how to help people, and I started to apply those things in my own life little by little.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I actually went to NUNM and started learning about, self-care. To me, that was a foreign word. I'd never heard of that concept. Self-care. What is self-care? And so I was like, are you kidding me? Self-care? No. And so the more I was exposed to it, the more I learned about it, the more it started to help me to help myself.
Yeah.
Because I can't really help other people if I myself am in bad shape. If I myself am struggling, not just physically with my physical ailments, but emotionally and psychologically. And so I started working on that. I saw a counselor a few times while I was at NUNM, and then I just started applying certain things that I learned. And I just started to recognize that there were certain things that were just not good for me. And I just started slowly removing those things from my life. And in like manner, I started to progress slowly back to healing, emotionally, and psychologically, and physically too, because, you and I both know that emotional and psychological stress can play a huge toll on your health. And so, yeah, so it was interesting because while at school, I definitely struggled, and I had a lot of stress both at home and at school. And I had some setbacks while I was at school, I'm not gonna lie. I wouldn't recommend that anyone just jump into some stressful situation until you've kind of de-stressed yourself first, right? And I say that sincerely. I don't mean to, like, it's hard for you to focus or give your all, your 100%, when you have so many other areas of your life that you haven't taken care of, that are going to drag you down, that are not going to help you. And so for me, my whole first year was almost, I don't want to say it was a waste, but I didn't get as much out of it as I could have. And as a result, I had to repeat some classes, and I'm not going to lie, I'm not going to sugarcoat it.
Yeah. Yeah,
It
I think a
was
lot
a
of
struggle
people
time.
would relate to your story just in terms of, healing is a journey. It's not something that happens quickly, especially because yeah, life is always going to get in the way. There's always things happening, and really what helped you the most was removing those obstacles, one at a time here and there. That's really what made the difference for you. So for people who maybe are struggling with similar things, maybe they're just pushing through symptoms all day. Maybe they're, feeling like their confidence is affected, like you with your eczema that was changing, the way you wore your clothes and different things like that. What would you say to those people to just kind of get them started? Like, where should they start? What should they do if they're just pushing through every day?
Wow, so, you know, I when I see patients and I see that they have all these health struggles, uh, I always wonder myself, not always immediately, but I always wonder myself, is there a bigger underlying problem, like, like the stress or anxiety? Maybe there's tension at home with a husband or a wife or a partner, a significant other, um, or with children, estranged children. I don't know. There's so many things, and the world is so complex. But many times you can give them the right medicines. You can, whether it's a drug or an herb or whatever, a supplement, it doesn't matter what it is. And you may not see results, or at least you may not see the results that you expected. And it's kind of the same thing. As in my case, it's because there are larger things that are burdening your psyche, your mental health, your, that are literally emanating as stress, as anxiety, as cortisol being released, and just rewiring the brain and how the brain thinks, even, and how it handles situations. Um, and so sometimes, these patients, it's, oh yeah, you have type 2 diabetes, or you're having some hormonal issues, or you're struggling with weight, and yeah, they may have hormones that are not, that are dysregulated, but the underlying condition is the stress that is literally causing an onslaught of, or a cascade of events going on in, both physically and psychologically. And so sometimes it's like, let's focus on what it is that is, maybe I can't help you there, but let's find someone who can. Because when we can figure out this, how removing the stress, how removing whatever it is that's causing the anxiety or the depression, uh, you know, you would be amazed how well the body can heal. I mean, oftentimes you don't even need to do a whole lot. You just need to remove the barriers. And it's as simple as that.
So, for people who are going through a lot of stress right now, whether it be in their relationship, like you experienced, or maybe from their job or family situations, what kind of things would you recommend for people who are going through stress? Like, how can they help themselves with that?
Well, there is so many things that you could say, because there is a specialist for just about everything, right? And so you got to start somewhere, and usually it starts with acknowledging that what you're doing isn't working. And only when you acknowledge that, you're kind of going in circles. And you get to that point where you're like, listen, I, I'm I'm ready to actually do something about this, because sometimes people aren't ready, even though they are ready, but they're not ready because there are still some walls that they have that for whatever reason they can't seem to get around. Uh, and these are self-made walls. And so trying to get rid of these walls is key. And sometimes you got to go back to maybe that good friend that you have, or that good doctor it could be, or a therapist, a great therapist or whatever, and ask them, hey, I know that maybe you've said some things to me in the past, and maybe I've just brushed them off but let's talk about that again. What is it, you always told me that, and I'm just using this as a crude example. This is kind of a bad example, but you always told me that that guy was bad for me, and it's like, well, yeah, he very abusive, and we never see you anymore, or that, that's the worst case scenario, and I would not want that for anyone. But there is that cyclic behavior, you know, that you endure the abuse, whether it's someone physically abusing you, or whether it's you abusing yourself by your habits, staying up late, eating things you shouldn't be, uh, I don't know, torturing yourself with, there's so many ways you can do that. So sometimes just going back and listening to what other people who are close to you are trying to tell you, that right there alone is a good place to start. And then you can take what you learn from these people, and then you can seek, there is a lot of evidence, as you might be aware, behind therapy, like cognitive behavioral. There's other behavioral therapies that work very well as well. And just because you may have had a bad experience with one therapist, it doesn't mean that they're all bad. Sometimes it just takes finding the right therapist. you got to connect with them. And so dealing with hashing these things out is super important. And then also, that like I said, this is a very complex thing so there are other things that can affect. Sometimes, people have issues with disorganization or um, I don't know, they procrastination, I mean, whatever. And those are all unique things that perhaps an expert can help you with, or even just counseling with your doctor or with a friend, or I don't know. But trying to help someone to come out of a health condition, like, let's just say eczema, like with me. Eczema was just one of the symptoms. I had many others, especially some severe GI issues. It wasn't, I love gluten products. I don't think there's anyone that doesn't, but I had to remove it from my life. Not forever, because I was able to reintroduce it and I figured out which ones worked good for me. But it took me some time. I avoided it for a long time.
Mhm.
And so in like manner, sometimes we have to start avoiding things, maybe people, uh, maybe experiences, or maybe certain, there's addictions. I mean, it really goes back to kind of what's an addictive behavior, because they create a dopaminergic response in your brain, and it feels great, those endorphins. It's like, wow, I want more of it. And so maybe that's the case with the woman being abused. I don't know. But yeah, um,
I think
I mean, it's hard to.
those are all great tips. And like you said, there's so much that can be done. But I think first of all is just that awareness piece for people who are pushing through and or they just have bad habits that I liked what you said. In a sense, they're abusing themselves because the body is telling them, hey, pay attention. I have eczema now. I have digestive distress. I'm not sleeping. I'm trying to tell you that what you're doing is not helping me. But we just ignore it. Right. And so I think that's the biggest thing is people have to start changing their mindset about that. Like, wow, what I'm doing is actually affecting my health. And there are things I can do to change this and to feel better. And like you said, it doesn't even mean it has to be things forever, right? Maybe you don't have to take out gluten forever, but you can figure out how to make it work for your body as long as you heal yourself first. So I think those are all really important things that you mentioned. The other thing I want to go back to from your story was you mentioned that there's kind of a lot of misconceptions about naturopaths, like you thought of them as quacks. So
Yeah.
what do you tell your patients now or people who ask you about naturopathic medicine? How do you help them understand more what naturopaths are or kind of get rid of that quack idea?
So it's interesting that you make that question, or the way you worded it. It's I was at a dental office yesterday, and I took my dad to the dentist for some procedures, and I was reading a paper and highlighting it and stuff, and the dentist asked me, "Oh, what do you do?" And I said, "Oh, I'm a naturopath." He's like, "Oh, wow, my wife's an MD, and we've been talking a lot about you guys lately. Like, you guys are different, and you guys are how did he word it? He was basically saying, like, you guys approach it from a different lens that we all could learn from." And I was like, "Oh, interesting." And then the assistant was like, "You're a naturopath?" And she's like, "Can I get your number? I really want blah blah blah. Where do you practice?" And I'm like, "Wow, okay, that was interesting." I didn't even tell my wife about this experience because I completely forgot. But so when it goes back to what's a quack or what's a naturopath, it's one of those things that's, unfortunately, there's a lot of noise out there. And it takes a lot, I could say misinformation or disinformation or whatever. And it takes a lot of investigating to actually learn the truth about what a naturopath is. Uh, there's volumes written about it. And so traditionally you have what are called just a naturopath or a traditional naturopath, and then you have what we call naturopathic doctors. Um, Traditional naturopaths, they have their own accrediting body. Maybe, I don't know if you knew this or not. A lot of people don't know this. and they function in many states, like Oklahoma and some of these other states in the South. But naturopaths, doctors or naturopathic physicians, which is what I am and what you are, uh, we also have our own accrediting body, but we also have different scholastic. Uh, there are differences in the education that we receive. So to become a naturopath, you have to have a bachelor's degree, typically in a pre-med degree if you don't already have it. If not, you just have to do the prerequisites, as I mentioned earlier, was in my case. And afterward, you can apply, and then it's a 4-year program that it's medical school for all intents and purposes. You go and you have all the first 2 years are basically biosciences. And so, you're in a cadaver lab, you're doing anatomy, physiology, and structure and function, and all these very intense uh, courses. The coursework is very, very intense, and it's equivalent to what an MD or a DO would get in essence. And so then after the first 2 years, and there are some minor differences in those first 2 years. And then after the first 2 years, the third and fourth year, uh, it changes somewhat, but not so much. I mean, we have rotations and we have additional blocks that we do specific to, like, I don't know, geriatrics, pediatrics, and immunology, and uh, rheumatology, and urology. You remember all that stuff, right? And then you also have to do preceptorships with other doctors out in town, and then you know you're doing more and more rotations, and so you're exposed to, at a clinical level, to patients that come from the community and with all kinds of ailments. And so what's great about naturopathic physicians, and even like NUNM, is that in Oregon, at least where we went to school, the Medicaid program, OHP, or what's known as Oregon Care, I think, or Oregon Health, um, they pay, but naturopaths are seen as a primary care provider, and we are reimbursed through insurance. And so it exposes us to an incredible amount of people and a population normally that are low in the lower socioeconomic state that we would otherwise not get to see, because unfortunately many of us naturopaths, uh, because we end up most of the times charging out of pocket, a lot of people can't really afford our services. And so in more and more insurance is paying for our services, and it exposes us to more people. And so that's really the biggest difference. Is there is we are an evidence-based primary care provider upon graduation. And then a lot of people will do a residency. Not everyone does, and it could be in anything really, but focusing in a specific area with at a specific clinic, whether it's just staying as a primary care provider or working with women's health or whatever. So when you talk with someone and they ask you, hey, so what's a naturopath? It's really hard to say, because we learn a lot of what MDs and DOs learn. We learn all the pharmacology, we learn, the botanicals, and we learn, so it's a blend of two. And so when people come to see us, we're going to try to help you in as in a natural way as if possible. It's not always possible, but we're going to take you where you are, and we're going to understand you where you are, because we understand the medications you're on. And in some states, and in a lot of states, if possible, we can even lower your dose and re-prescribe you a different medication if it's more appropriate, and or help you eliminate it altogether. And so as a naturopathic physician, we we are using the principles of modern healthcare, but we're also blending, and we're marrying literally holistic health, natural health with conventional health in an effort to help people where they are. And so as a result, we have way more tools in our toolkit, as they say. than conventional medicine or conventional docs do. And people don't always understand that. And so it's not always easy to explain that to everyone because, it depends on the time and it's really hard to say, hey, well, we do this, we do this, we do this, we do that, when normally they just want a really short answer, right? Um,
I think
so,
you did a
but
great
yeah,
job, though. I think, what I often tell people is we're a great bridge, right, between conventional medicine and natural medicine because we're trained in both. So people who are hesitant, maybe they haven't seen a holistic doctor before, it's a great place to start because we do understand medicines and interactions and all of those things, but we also have all of these extra tools like you're mentioning. So what would you say are your favorite naturopathic modalities that you use that maybe conventional doctors aren't trained in as much?
wow. Well, I personally am a big fan of botanical medicine. Um, that is one thing that really got me. That's just botanical medicine in general. I approach it a little bit differently because I am kind of a geek or a nerd when it comes to the science. I also, when I graduated, I also worked, or when I went to NUNM, I also got a master's in integrative medicine research. And so I did a lot of outside work to get my master's. And I worked with the company and we worked with a lot of poop and we did a lot of study research on feces basically and on the microbes found in feces and so um, I have interest in a lot of places. Uh, I like botanical medicine. I'm not the greatest fan of homeopathy, but I do appreciate it and I have seen it work wonders. And there's a lot of other things, I mean, that we can do. Another thing that is kind of going by the wayside that I really, really appreciate, and I don't know if any of my other colleagues that we graduated with in our cohort really are much into this, but uh, I really like hydrotherapy and
Yes.
nature. That is like my favorite. It's something that we want to implement here because we live in Washington State, and it's something that we want to do ourselves here. We want to set up, So I'm really into, sauna and both dry and wet, and I really like just all of hydrotherapy. There's so many different therapies, and I like
Explain real quick what hydrotherapy is for people who don't know.
Okay, that's a great question. So hydrotherapy is basically using water, hydro, and then therapy in a therapeutic manner. And so you can use water in a therapeutic manner for multiple things. For instance, you use water, I hope, at least every day to brush your teeth, right? You use water to take a shower, right? And so water is useful for many things. My chemistry teacher used to say that it was the greatest solvent in the world, not because of its properties, but because of its abundance, right? And so water can be useful in so many ways. You drink it and it helps expel impurities through your urine. You drink it, it helps expel impurities through your colon. Uh, Now, when you apply it topically, like as water, you get in water, it's also useful in that manner. Now, when you modify temperature, whether it's hot or cold, it has different physiological responses on your body. And so you can apply it either on your entire body, like in a sauna, or, constitutional hydrotherapy, or you can do just a localized area. Like you can put it on your feet and then you can do ice on your head if you have a headache. I mean, there's so many different things and so many ways you can do it. And so in using water, you can help promote blood flow and as a result, lymph flow. And you can even improve venous stasis in many conditions or in many cases. Um, so that there's a lot of ways you can use water, just water, to help your body recover from different states of illness.
So
So yeah, I
amazing.
don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, for sure. I love hydrotherapy as well. That's one of the things I did when I first got out of practice or out of school was I actually went to Europe
Oh
in
yeah.
Germany and I did a
Yeah.
tour of all the hydrotherapy spas there and really tried to learn. They would wake us up at 6 in the morning and we would have to go get sprayed down by cold water and all of these things. But one of my favorite
Yeah.
tips I like to tell patients that you can do at home is just even if you just dip your arms into cold water, that is as effective
Yeah.
as drinking a cup of coffee in terms of waking you up and just stimulating that energy. So there are things you can do even from home if you can't go to a clinic who does hydrotherapy. But it's really an amazing practice. And like you said, it's just water, right? Really drawing on those nature benefits for sure. So let's talk about
Yeah.
something else you mentioned because I just want to give people a little more clarity about the poop situation. Okay, so Dr. Moses, as you can tell, he's a great researcher, and there's a lot of research in naturopathic medicine. So I want everyone to know that because, as you said, it is evidence-based. But there's this idea of fecal transplants, and I think that's part of what you were researching with looking at poop. But just explain a little bit more what you're talking about so people aren't so weirded out about, you just sitting there studying feces all day.
Good point. Yeah. Oh, naturopaths, they're those weird poop dogs. No, actually, you work with poop. Um, the microbiome is a very, very amazing, interesting subject. I mean, it's been an up and coming subject, and the wealth of knowledge that we're learning from it, even to the point where maybe you've heard, I'm sure you have, but for our listeners, there's such a thing as the estrobolome, where your microbes can actually affect or have an effect on estrogen
Yeah.
and how estrogen is whether either retained or excreted in your poop. And so that's very interesting. And there's conditions that can exacerbate, beta glucuronidase. That is what does that. And it can make it so that beta glucuronidase and the microbes are regulators of hormones and of so many other things. And so having a dysbiosis in your gut is tantamount to basically having crappy health. So if your microbes are not if they're not happy, or if they are in a state where you don't have the right blend of them, you're not going to have good health because your microbes, bacteria, virus, fungi, yeast, and several others, but they are all playing an interconnected, um, there's a symbiotic relationship that exists between all of them. And there's an amazing thing that they are helping to regulate many things, including autoimmune conditions. And so when we talk about fecal microbiota transplantation, or which is what I had kind of alluded to earlier, it is a practice that has been going on. Well, actually, honestly, it's been going on for thousands of years. The Chinese started it with this yellow soup. You can look it up. It's pretty gross. It's made out of poop, and you would drink it, but they would give it to people who had diarrhea, and it would help them. And so with FMT, it's commonly used for people who have Clostridium difficile infection that's antibiotic resistant. But what we're learning is that it can also be useful for many other conditions. For instance, there is some studies that are coming out that are using FMT to treat women who are having postmenopausal women who are having an estrogen imbalance, which that's very interesting. So that just goes to show you the power of the power in poop. I mean, I don't want to say it like that, but yeah. So there's a lot of things that go on, and there are other hormones that it regulates that your gut microbes regulate, things like thyroid hormones. There's a lot of insulin resistance that can kind of be attributed to the gut microbiome, obesity, um, even things like uh, chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia can kind of be associated with that. And another really amazing, there's quite a bit of research in this, is the diseases of the brain like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and dementia. Those are all conditions that also have found huge benefit from an FMT or a transplantation, or you can take it in a cap. It can be either rectally or through a cap. Um, there are some risks uh, with doing these procedures, but also in colitis, uh, IBD, the bowel diseases like Crohn's and colitis. Those diseases can also find benefit from IBD, which it should start to give you an idea. There's so many things connected, and if you can treat it with an FMT, or you can see changes by just giving someone a healthy transplant from a healthy donor that's been thoroughly screened, obviously, it's interesting that you're gonna, in many cases, see a response and a response for the better. And that there's more I could say. I mean, we were particularly studying metabolites like short chain fatty acids and ceramides and indole and they all have effects overall in the body that are like just out of this mind blowing. They're out of this world. But it's just all I'm trying to say is that your gut is affected by many things. And so it's key to keep your gut health as the number one priority. And that can only occur if you have a lifestyle with a diet that is going to feed those microbes, right? And
So
so,
let's talk about that actually, because first of all, I'm glad everyone heard you don't have to drink the soup like in ancient China, right? You can take capsules or you can do a transplant rectally, but the whole point is, we're made of bugs. We have so many bacteria in us all the time, and our poop is pooping it out, but we also intake it all the time. So in terms of feeding good bugs and making sure we're getting the proper diet, I know earlier you talked about in your own story that, you went vegan for a time and you actually didn't feel better. And I know some people do feel better, but what do you feel like is general principles for diet that people should be taking on?
well, I will go on the record and say that there is no one size fits all. We do know that there are people, and this is something that you learn when you do enough research, is that what works for one person doesn't work for somebody else. And why? We don't know. We suspect it's the microbes. There are diversity of microbes. The alpha diversity is unique for every particular person. And so you're going to get different responses to even a drug. So drugs are handled differently many a times because what a lot of people don't understand is that the gut is the largest endocrine organ. We don't recognize it as such, but the gut is the largest endocrine organ in the body. But when you think about it, even us, as what we learned in medical school, you think of of an endocrine organ, what do you think? What comes to your mind? I mean, I know in my case, it's like, well, I'm thinking, I don't know, the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, pineal gland, the
Renal,
thyroid, the parathyroid, pancreas, all those, they're sending out things, right? But, you know, I think there's like nine recognized, as far as if I remember correctly, organs that are specifically endocrine organs. But when you look at the gut itself, the gut outdoes all of them. It handles and it processes so many more hormones. It's incredible that we would just not even consider it. It's like an afterthought, right? So, and I say that because that's the case nowadays. Oh, you're sick. Okay, here's an antibiotic. Oh, you're sick. Here's a laxative. Oh, you're sick. Here's this other thing or this other drug, and they all have an effect on your internal gut, which remember is the largest endocrine organ. And so, uh, when we're talking about how this all has an effect on your overall health and what works for one person who's vegan, because I've seen vegans that are thriving, but I've also seen people who were vegan because, well, I'm sorry, I've also seen people who are vegan who had the worst experience. And it's not like they tried it for a few weeks. These are people like in my case, I was vegan for 4 years and overall a vegetarian for 10, right? And so I eventually slowly reverted back. And so I wouldn't call myself, a carnivore or whatever, but I have introduced both, and I find that a healthy balance for me has worked. Um, you gotta have you gotta feed your body the right food for the microbes that are in your gut. And sometimes it takes a test to look, see what's dominant. Sometimes tests don't always help, but sometimes they do. And you can look and see, oh, you have these dominant microbes. Maybe we should feed you less of these foods and more of these foods because this is what may push you to have better or more ideal health. Um, so generally speaking, if you're getting good fiber, good quality fiber, uh, hopefully that is not bound by enormous amounts or copious amounts of sugar, because that's typically the problem with our complex or with our simple carbs. Um, but if you're getting fiber that is of higher quality, typically from whole foods, and you're combining it with good sources of nutrition, like, good, well-sourced meats and eggs. I personally like pasture-raised meats and eggs. And wild caught fish, here in Washington, we have lots of salmon. I'm sure back east you guys have lots of fish out there too. So there's a lot that you can do. You just have to make an effort to go out and find it and get it. And so ideally going back to the foods that our ancestors were eating should give you kind of a general idea as to what might bring health back, because disease didn't just come from one day to the next. Disease, there's a saying that says disease how does it go? Disease is in it'll come to me. Anyways, but just in one other comment, the where did it go? I forgot. I had it pulled up in a second, but you can't, it goes something like you can't
It's okay, you'll find it. In
oh,
the
it'll come.
meantime, I want
Yeah, yeah.
everyone to know that Dr. Moses actually raises his own animals. So he's very much connected to the food process. And I think that has a lot to say too about health in general. If people are more connected to their food source and they know where it's coming from and how it's raised and all of these things, plus it's grown in their area, not like, pineapples in some other country, right? All of those things influence our health as well.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. I do have a 10-acre farm. Uh, my wife is also a naturopath or naturopath, but we have animals, sheep and cows and a dairy cow as well, and goats and lots of chickens. And um, yeah, we have a lot going on the farm. And then we have a garden, but it's diet is super important because you can't out exercise a crappy diet, right?
Yes, yes.
You can't out supplement a crappy diet, and you can't out medicate a crappy diet. The diet is the foundation. So it's what you put in your mouth. It's what you choose to put in your mouth. So we have to reframe our thinking from, oh, but I really like, this, that, or the other, to a more, well, how healthful or helpful is this food to my overall health? Is it, I know that it's really hard with food. Um, People don't like their foods to be taken away. Like, I'm not trying to step on toes, but like, the cupcakes and the cookies and whatever. I'm dogging on the sugars here because I personally find that sugars are the main problem. There are other things. There are some sources of oils that I also don't think are helpful or healthful. But I mean, if you can just regulate, it's very simple. What you put in your mouth, you will notice that just on the diet alone, many of your health uh, outcomes will improve. And so I don't know, what have you seen?
I agree. I think that really focusing in on getting enough protein, I think that's one of the biggest issues with people who go vegetarian or vegan is they tend to focus more on carbs because there's more of that available. But if you're doing that, you're not getting all of the nutrients you need to create your body tissues and to have energy and all of these things. So you have to make sure you're doing that in a healthful way if you are going vegan. But I find a lot of people, the reason they do benefit, if they're one of those people who benefits, is because they're taking out things like dairy. And dairy can be really inflammatory for a lot of people. So sometimes if you just take that out and you don't have to go full vegan, you can still get the benefits. I also just see that, maybe people will feel good vegetarian or vegan for a while, maybe like 6 months or 8 months. And that's because that's how long it takes to deplete some of our stores like B12 and iron. Our body can hang on for a while with a fair amount in there, but once you've depleted those, that's when you start to feel the effects. So you got to make sure that you're getting all the right micronutrients and the macronutrients, whatever diet you're doing. So that's a big piece for sure. Um, but we have a little bit of time here left. I wanted to get your take on where you see naturopathic medicine going in the future. How do you think it's going to be part of our whole medical system? Do you think something's going to change? Do you think people's perspectives of natural medicine will change, or where would you want to see it go?
Well, ideally, I would love for naturopathic medicine to become more accepted, more mainstream, covered by, insurance and whatnot, legislated in every state in America. And, I'm hopeful that we are getting there. We're gaining ground every year. Um, I feel that we as naturopaths and we have our place in medicine, and we have had our place for a very long time. And so naturopaths have existed for well over a century. And so uh, when it comes to comparing naturopaths to conventional medicine, I like to say conventional medicine has its place. Um, Sometimes it can seem very anti or anti this, anti that, but that's not the case at all. It's more of a meeting on common ground and assisting each other where we can. Um, Especially when it comes to uh, ER or traumatic events that you need to go to the hospital immediately for. They shine. The conventional medicine just shines there. We're not really trained for that, nor do we want to be. That's not what we got into medicine for. Um, I know a few ER docs, and they're great docs, and I would trust them with my life. Uh, but in those emergent situations. But now, for the more long term, for the more longevity promoting medicine, as you could potentially name it, that is something altogether different that I see a trend amongst some conventional docs of them kind of going into what has been labeled functional medicine. And so there's a lot of docs, great docs, like Peter Attia is one of them. And, and I mean, well, Andrew Huberman's not a medical doctor, but he is a neurobiologist. But there's a lot of other doctors that are shifting. And, Andrew Weil is the other really well-known guy. I should just mention him that are really that have shifted like Andrew Weil altogether in the functional medicine realm. And so I think that's a great thing. They are making a vested interest in helping to change their patients' lives and not just focusing on the pharmacological interventions, but using the pharmacological interventions as either an option or a last resort, which is how we tend to practice. Now, where I would like to see us get to is I would love it if naturopaths, if we could have our own, how would I say this, residency funded positions like conventional docs do that you could match after you graduate and go and do a residency in an area that's focused to a particular, because we have gastro A&P, we have the endocrinology, we have oncology, And so it would be great. And I know we have FABNO certification, but it's not quite the same. Um, and so it would be awesome to even get that experience. Um, and to, especially in the areas where we shine, like gastroenterology. And, anytime I go to gastroenterology to do my colonoscopy or whatever, and I'm talking with the docs there, I'm amazed at how little they actually know about the gut. Uh, they know their field very well and they can do the procedures very well, but it's not, there isn't a whole lot of outside of their immediate, only a select few really have a really hands-on approach, and they really thoroughly understand things like the microbiome, and like a doctor, a guy from California who does all the SIBO research. I cannot remember his name, but Dr. Pimentel, he's an MD. He's another great doc who's really just, SIBO used to be one of those, oh, that doesn't exist, or it's, people didn't believe it. It took them years to really just get an ICD code for it. And so either way, I would just like for us to be more accepted, as I see that is already happening. More and more people know about us. It's evident every day when I meet someone. If they ask me, what do you do? And I say, oh, I'm a naturopath, they're like, oh, where are you practicing? Or, this, that, and the other. And suddenly it strikes a conversation that lasts longer than what I had expected, because, I'm usually, I'm on my way to do something and I don't really have time. But yeah, naturopaths, also, I feel like as naturopaths, there is a schism even inside of naturopathy. Some of us don't want anything to do with conventional medicine, and some of us are happy in conventional medicine. And then, we have to, within our own ranks, kind of come together and come to terms, if we really want to make advances.
Totally.
And
Totally.
that's
And
just,
we've talked
a
about
telling a
that
lot.
in some of our other podcasts as well. So if you want to learn more about the different types of naturopaths, you can definitely learn more from our previous
Yeah.
podcasts. But yes, I agree that, for example, gastroenterologists don't necessarily know everything. I've had patients come to me who say, oh, my gastroenterologist says that what I eat doesn't matter. It doesn't affect my gut, right? So there's some big things that are out there that we need to address for sure. But my last question for you, Dr. Moses, before we head off here is, if your kids could learn just one thing about health from you, what would you want that to be?
Honestly, one thing about health, it's really hard to say that, but I honestly feel that, you know, there was a recent article, and I'm not going to get into it, but it was in a way attacking food as medicine, but teaching my kids that their food is their medicine, right? But the same food can also be
Poison.
the cause of, yeah, it can also be your poison. Because in toxicology, Dr. Phipps used to tell us that the, the poison is in the dose,
Mhm.
okay? You can kill yourself by drinking too much water, but water is a good thing, right?
Mhm.
So even a good thing can kill you. So I would just leave it at that. Teaching kids temperance and the appropriate use of foods, and how and when to say no. I've had
Yeah,
enough cupcakes.
that's a huge one for kids. I think there's not enough nutrition, food education out there, so I'm hoping that will start to change. But I so appreciate you spending an hour with us today on our Time to Thrive podcast. And if people want to learn more about you, they can also hop on our website, livewellness.health. Any other parting words you want to add on?
No, I mean, I think,
We've covered a
if
lot of
you've asked,
ground today.
yeah.
Perfect. Okay, well, everyone, thanks so much for tuning in. And you've learned some great things from Dr. Moses today. Really start to bring awareness to the stress in your life and certain ways to address it, which he mentioned, but also think about your food as your medicine and really make sure that you're seeking the right kind of care for yourself, whether it's a conventional doctor or a naturopath or a naturopath. right? Make sure you're doing your research. So thank you so much, Dr. Moses. And in the meantime, everyone else, keep thriving.